Welcome, everybody, to Road Work Ahead, a podcast that explores the unmapped future of business and technology. My name is Sam Gert, and I am your host. The last few years have shown us that big changes in the way we think about work can happen incredibly fast when you have the right catalyst. COVID pushed us all to think about remote work. Gen Z is pushing us to think more about culture. And AI is forcing us to think about the humanness of work. At the heart of it all is the struggle to balance work and life. Today, I'm sharing a conversation with Chris Leone, the CEO of Web Strategies, who is taking this opportunity to try something in his company that most people are still very skeptical about. It was an amazing discussion. Chris has a sharp mind for business and people, and I can't wait for you all to hear what he has to say. Chris, you came to my attention because of something very special, very unusual that you're doing in your company. You are piloting a 4-day work week, not 4 10-hour days, but 4 8-hour days. I'm curious, how did that come about?
So first of all, an important distinction, because I get asked this question a lot. Are you doing 4 10-hour days? And I'm like, no, we're doing 4 8-hour days. So the model's called 100-80-100, which means 100% of the 100% of the productivity and 80% of the time for 100% of the pay. So that's the model. So your question, how did it come about? It was first presented to me by an employee a couple years ago. It was the first time I'd ever heard of it. And I had probably the reaction that most people running a business would have, which is, what are you, out of your mind?
Right.
We couldn't work in 4 days. Like, what are you trying to do? You trying to kill the company? So I kind of brushed it off, but that was the first time I heard about it. And then it kind of resurfaced. We're a company that we're always, asking our employees, how can we be better? How can we make the employee experience better? We do a lot of workplace surveys and things like that. And it crept back up, and it happened earlier this year. We heard more about it from our people, but at the same time, there was some data starting to come out in some big publications about 4-day work week, the result of 4-day work week pilots. And so I was seeing these in my regular, news feed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, yeah, let's see what this found. And it's just the data was overwhelmingly positive, enough so that I wasn't just going to dismiss it. Right. I'm like, okay, there's like, I'm a believer in data. I trust data. And so it kind of opened my mind up to the possibility now. And I'm like, all right, so I started to noodle on it a bit. And about a year ago, I hired a director of people operations. And now I had somebody to kind of like talk directly and collaborate with on this.
Yeah.
And I think the big switch in my mind that got me to really seriously consider it is to just suspend my skepticism and
Okay.
say, well, what if all of these benefits that these pilot companies supposedly get out of 4-day work week is real?
Yeah.
And I mean, these are benefits like reduced turnover, higher recruiting, higher employee satisfaction, better employee wellness, increased productivity, which
Yeah.
is very counterintuitive. And so I was like, well, what if that is true? Like, what if you can actually achieve that? And I started to think about all the upside. In fact, the main thing that was always kind of hanging around my head is like, well, what about productivity? What about productivity? What about productivity? And so the data was saying companies maintain, sometimes even increase productivity. So that was the first thing I was like, I'm really curious about that. I want to know more. And so I reached out. We reached out to these firms that had organized these global pilots that are producing the reports and studies that you're reading about in the news. And I became kind of friendly with one guy in particular, and we got into some deep conversations on it. And he's like, Chris, the thing is, it's like this is really an experiment in efficiency. And it's like I heard things like there are 4-day work weeks already there, but they're kind of masked in this 5-day work week model that we're so accustomed to over the last, you know, at least 80 years. I think a 5-day work week came about like in the 40s, and before that we were working, more than that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so I just got fascinated by the idea of, well, can this actually improve how efficient we are? Because now we're challenging our long held beliefs about how much time does it take. I was exposed to things like Parkinson's law, which says it takes as much time as you have to do something, right? Time expands to the time that you have to do something. And I was like, there's so many interesting kind of psychological experiments kind of nested within this. And then you think about all the benefits on the other side of it. It's like, well, what if you could actually chop out a bunch of useless stuff you don't do, meetings that are not worth it? Are we taking an hour to do this because that's how long we think it takes, but we can actually do it in 15 minutes, on and on and on. And then I'm like, well, if we can actually be really kind of critical of how we do things today and chop a lot of stuff off, and then we get a day back in our week, and then our employees are happier and more people want to come work for us. I was like, there's too strong of an argument for it to just not at least test it, right? And so
Right.
that was the journey. I tell people a lot of times, I'm like, the switch that flipped in my head was like, well, what if you could maintain productivity, then look at those benefits? It's worth a shot. And so that's what
Sure.
got us to where we are now.
Okay. I've got about 30 rapid fire questions for you now. I'll rattle them off as quickly as I can, and I just want to get some clarification on several things that you said because there's so much to unpack there. But first of all, the data that you were seeing, these pilot programs, were you seeing long-term data or short-term data?
This is a good question. It's well, depending on how we define it, I'll just tell you the timeframes that I was familiar with. It was companies would create a baseline, so it would be 6 to 12 months before, and then the data from running a 6-month or a 3-month or a 12-month pilot. So that's what they were comparing. What I haven't seen yet, which is what I'm really interested in, is what is the 2, 3, 4, 5-year outlook look like?
Right.
Because now you're out of the honeymoon phase, and you can't really go and recommend marriage to somebody based off of your honeymoon trip.
Yeah.
It's like, that ain't marriage, right? So I haven't seen the long-term data yet, but comparing the actual pilot period, which is anywhere from 3 to 12 months, to the prior period is how people are measuring it. And obviously that you're comparing COVID times too. So there's a lot of funky stuff in there.
Yeah, well, and that's the other point of clarification. This sounds like this is right in the middle of COVID, maybe even going into it, and this is also pre AI tools, pre a lot of the talk that we have about increased efficiencies with GPT or whatever. This is the idea that without these tools, you could find those increases in efficiency.
Yeah, I think the movement because these large language models like Chat GPT and Bard, those hit like November, December, January of 22 and 23. So
Right.
these pilots were happening in the early 20s prior to that. So yeah, they're two very separate things, although now they work very well together.
Okay. And are you running this pilot through an organization?
We chose not to do that. A lot of companies do, where they're part
Okay.
of this cohort and they get, they pay a little bit of money and then they have a community that they could talk to. They have like an advisor they could talk to, but we felt good enough to experiment with it by ourselves.
And how long are you guys running this pilot?
So the first window is 3 months. We're week 7 right now. We started 1st of July. We're recording this mid-August. So that's how long we've been at it. We want to go 3 months, provided that or assuming that there's nothing disastrous that comes about,
Right.
then we'll just continue to extend it. I don't expect that I'm going to say lock it in and say this is what we are now indefinitely. I think we'll, if it works after 3, we'll go to 6. If 6 works, we'll do it a year, and then, we'll take it from there.
So, what kind of response then are you getting from employees at every level who obviously are going to be motivated to keep this model? What kind of response do you get when the idea of stopping the pilot and going back to a 5-day work week, when that comes up?
I really don't want to have that conversation.
Yeah.
I as the CEO, I think very highly of, who works in my space and has built a really, really impressive company. We were talking a couple weeks ago, and he's like, Chris, it's really hard to take something back once you've given
Yeah.
it.
Well, and we
And
should also probably here go ahead and clarify your company is fully remote.
yeah, yeah.
So
So
that plays a big part in it too.
fully remote, 4-day. I mean, we are going against the grain of,
Right.
compared to what's happening out there right now. Yeah, which I'll be honest, makes me a little uncomfortable in like on the surface of it. But then I kind of go back to, just don't, it doesn't matter what other people do. It doesn't matter what other people think. Just execute the best you can in your world with what you can control. And that's what we've had to do. But we've had to really, if we've had blinders on in the past, we've really had to kind of pull our hood up over our blinders so there's no outside noise, because everything else that's going on out in the world is saying, no, it's doesn't work. You got to go back to the office and blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. And then stuff going on in the economy. But yeah, we are fully remote. We've been fully remote for a long time. We've gotten really good at it. So we're layering both fully remote and 4-day on top of each other right now.
Yeah. And you are fully remote not because of what happened with COVID. You're fully remote from well before that.
Yeah, from the get go. Like,
Yeah.
so we started in 2004. I came on in '08. We've always been remote. We've had an office for a few years in there, just because we acquired another company. They had a lease. We kept it. And then we were like, oh, this is kind of nice. We'll get a bigger one, but we never required people to come in. It was more of like a crashing space, and hey, let's meet here. Or some people just wanted to change the scenery, whatever. But never required people to come in. Some people we never saw. We had people spread out across the country, not as many as we have now, but we still had some then. Um, but then it was 2021 and the lease was coming up, and I'm like, this makes no sense. And so I said, hey, we're not renewing. I actually took a picture of the empty office space and I posted it on LinkedIn and said, we're letting our lease go. We're going to continue to be fully remote, yada, yada. And it went viral because I think that was kind of the big conversation that was just starting to happen at that time. It was 21. So
Yeah.
we were only 12 months after the start of COVID, but there, if you kind of think back, there were these kind of ebbs and flows of how comfortable people were going out, being in the office, whatever. And 21 was kind of the first to push back. But I mean, it went viral on LinkedIn. It kind of became the hub of conversation around remote work versus in person. So that was a really interesting experience. But all said and done, it's something that we've always been remote first. We have a co-working we have co-working memberships now, so
Yeah.
people can pop into. We're in Richmond, Virginia, and we have co-working memberships at a place that has like 4 or 5 buildings in the area. So people live all over the town. They can go into that, and then if you're out of market, if you want, we'll pay up to a certain amount for a co-working membership for you if you like that change of scenery. But I mean, I don't know that we've gotten any requests on that. Meanwhile, I've
Hmm.
got somebody who's local who can go into a co-working space here. She's been working from Europe the last couple months with her family.
Okay.
So she's taken full advantage of it. And we think it's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the flexibility that you get. What I'll be curious now is maybe we catch up in a couple of years. What happens, I guess, with that 4-day pilot combined with working remote? But I'm also curious what happens. You talked a little bit about trimming fat, hacking things off that aren't absolutely necessary. What happens if 6 months, 12 months down the road, you recognize a drop in quality, not just a drop in
Yeah.
efficiency with time, but a drop in quality? How do you measure that?
Yeah, so we kind of have a combination of leading and lagging metrics on this, and then of course there's the kind of subjective ones, anecdotal ones that we could look at too along the way. The quality one, I think that's one that's going to take a little bit longer to see, um, and it's going to show up in a couple different ways. I think so. We survey our clients every quarter, and we ask the Net Promoter Score question, which is how likely are you to recommend us.
Yeah.
I created a metric called net value score, which is still a 1 out of 10 question, but it asks, how valuable do you consider the work we do?
Yeah.
And I've got years and years and probably thousands of data points on that over time. So I can see how that's trended over the years, both for clients that are still with us and clients that have left us. So I have good baselines for all that stuff. Um, I think we're going to look at that, but of course that's coming from the client perspective. You know,
Yeah.
um, we, we're also going to track how long it takes people to complete tasks. We've seen a drop in that so far, which is good. It's like it's not big. It's like a 9% drop in time to complete tasks. Uh, but that's just the billable work. The non-billable work could also see reductions in time, right?
Right.
So, but that doesn't speak to quality. It says how long did it take to do something, right? So, I think we're going to see it show up also in client retention, in the net value, net promoter scores, and then just being able to go in and look at the work and say, what are we doing for this? What results are we getting? We use a tool called Gong that records every conversation between an account manager and a client. And it transcribes all of that, and we can search it, so we can look for certain trigger words like
Okay.
concerned or results or whatever, and then go back, look at those transcripts and say, is the client raising more concerns around this than they used to? And then, of course, senior level people can go in and objectively look at it and say, is this good work? Are we getting results? Pull up analytics, pull up Looker Studio, look at the reports and say, are we consistently, getting good wins, compared to before? But of course, marketing is always this moving target. So that there are the ebbs and flows of your success rate. But yeah, I guess long story short, there's kind of this potpourri of things that we have to consider and look at that paints the broader picture.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and guess here that most business owners, most agencies, in your case, don't have the data that you have. You seem to be somebody who is something of a data geek. You're constantly looking for ways to record and collect and measure data.
Yeah.
I know a lot of agencies don't do that. So would embarking on a pilot program like this be less maybe easy to undertake, more difficult, simply because they don't really have anything to measure against? How valuable do you feel that data is in a program like this?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's like a couple ways to approach that. First of all, I have a lot of empathy for smaller firms that are just trying to like get the job done. I mean,
Right.
I joined when we were like 5 or 6 people. I know what an agency of that size feels like. We're 45 now, so it's got a different feel. We've got more redundancy and things like that. Look, just if you go, just science 101, like if you design experiments poorly, you're not going to be able to trust the results, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I think the better you can set up the experiment, the more reliable the results are. Um, yes, I am a data nerd. I love connecting spreadsheets and to our project management systems and pushing them into a report. It's like literally one of my favorite things to do, as sick as that sounds. But I just I feel good knowing things. And like if
Yeah.
something is ambiguous, it creates anxiety for me, because I'm like, I don't know. I can't feel like I can manage this well. I don't know if this is the right decision to make, because I don't know if this is really happening, because we don't have good data on it. But it comes back to one of the things I just love about this 4-day work week experiment is that it creates a forced constraint.
Yeah.
And any creative person will tell you, if they've got 2 weeks to do something, they do their best work with 2 hours left before that deadline. Because there's something about that kind of pressure that just activates the creativity in your head. And while we were very data focused as an organization prior to this, the experimental design of setting up the pilot forced us to come up with even better metrics we never had before. So, for example, I'm not crazy about build time. Okay, and so when we're looking at, well, how would we measure whether or not it's people are as productive? You say, well, is their build time the same? But at the same time, we're also trying to incentivize people to figure out how to do things in less time.
Yeah.
So if we're saying success means you're still logging your 30 or 35 hours a week, but you need to figure out how to do things in less time, like those two things contradict each other in a way, right? Or at least kind of pull against each other. So I said, you know what really matters is that we're still doing the same number of tasks per week. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, that's something we should measure. I want people to take less time doing those, but we should still be able to do the same amount. If you figure out how to do things in a lot less time and you got more time back in your day, that you've earned that, right? In my opinion. So we created number of tasks completed. And then I've got this really brilliant person helping with me, helping operations. She's my like manager of ops, and she's really into our tool that manages like our project management tool. And so we were collaborating on that, and we were looking at it, and we're like, turnaround time's another one, right? Because if a 4-day work week, and if people are doing less work in those 4 days, turnaround times are going to increase, because now
Yeah.
work that you would have done on the Friday gets kicked to the next week, and then it's just things continue to get pushed out. So I said, that's another metric that should stay the same. Turnaround time needs to be within the acceptable window, whether it's 7, 14 days, whatever you've defined for like that type of task. So then we went through and we started to create new ways that people send tasks throughout the organization and priority levels. And then we got a really great, brilliant developer we have to find ways to push that data into a spreadsheet. Now I'm manipulating it, putting on a scoreboard. So now we're looking at average turnaround time of tasks. We're looking at the percentage of tasks that are marked as urgent, which create a lot of chaos, because that's like, stop what you're doing.
Yeah.
You got to work on this now. And then the percentage of tasks that are considered that are like long-term planning tasks, which we want to see more of. That means an account manager is looking 2 to 3 months out and getting work on the project sheet now, which helps everybody, versus, hey, this needs to get done quickly. So now I've put that onto our main company scoreboard, and we'll see are more urgent tasks coming in? Are our account managers starting to plan further out? And then what's the turnaround time? And then I can break all this out by department too, because that's going to vary quite a bit. So the point is that even for us who were very kind of data minded with our operations before, because we were challenged to prove the effectiveness or the success or the failure of 4-day work week, we had to come up with new metrics. And so we did.
Yeah.
And now we're even better for it, right? So I love the effect of a forced constraint on these things. And that's one of the reasons I think this experiment's so powerful. But I just circling back to your question, when I talked to a lot of, I talked to a lot of CEOs who had done 4 days or piloting it or whatever. And I had these very specific questions. How do you measure this? What do you track this? And like, I was never really satisfied with the answers. Like I would get vague answers, and I talked to somebody who's just like, yeah, we don't measure it. I'm like, it's not good enough for me, So there are people out there who are just like, hey, if clients are happy and they're still paying and we think we're doing good work, great. All right. I'm not that loosey goosey. Someone else may be, and I think they've made it work, but I need something more conclusive than that.
So the goal of the work week, the 4-day work week, is a definite goal. You're not satisfied to just give this to your employees and have revenue remain sustainable, have work remain adequate. There's a definite goal. How is the pilot affecting things like your growth goals and your percentage year over year increases in revenue, things like that?
Yeah, I mean the top level metrics that need to be protected, and I was very clear about this when I said we were even considering 4 days. We have to continue to hit our revenue goals. We have to continue to hit our gross margin goals, and we share those percentages and numbers with people so they know what they are. We have to continue to hit our retention goals, our upsell goals, our client satisfaction and survey goals. Those are untouchable. Okay.
Yeah.
And again, in my mind, if you can hit all those and people say that they like 4 days,
Yeah.
What else is there to talk about? You know?
Yeah, that does simplify it.
Yeah, but I don't want to just lean on those metrics because those are lagging metrics. So I need
Right.
leading metrics I can look at on a week by week basis to say, all right, are we still executing the way that we expected to, and have it be somewhat predictive of the outcomes that we want to get.
Right. And so end of the day, I'm picturing the average business owner hitting his growth goals, hitting his revenue goals, hitting his margins. He's for whatever reason, because the average business owner's not going to do this, but he's done a pilot program like this and it's working and people are happy. Most people are still going to say, okay, well, if I had 5 days, I could crush those goals and we could grow revenue even faster and we could have better margins and we could have, all this other stuff. So there's still a philosophical, people oriented motivation behind all of this. Regardless of how the numbers pan out, you're still boiling it down to the quality of employment. That's accurate?
That's a good way to. Yeah, that's making me think for a second here. Yeah, I mean, because you say, well, let's get the benefit of the 4-day work week, which means we're more efficient, we're more protective of our time. But then let's expand it back out to 5. Now, first of all, in practical terms, that would be hard to execute because you're going to give something to people, you're going to get all the benefit, and then you're going to take it away, go back up to 5. Also, I think once you go back up to 5, you can lose, like you can't retain some of those things. You could retain the lessons and the new systems and automations and whatever you set up. But from an employee wellness perspective, I think you're going to lose that. The
Right.
retention, the recruitment, just employee satisfaction, all that kind of stuff. And keep in mind too, the it's not compression of time, right? Because we're not doing 4 10 days. Sometimes that's called like the compression model. I think we're doing 4 8 days. Those 8 hours are more intense,
Yeah.
right? So to then do that over 5 days, I think it starts to become counterproductive, right? So
Yeah.
just from a practical standpoint, I'm not sure. Good luck if you want to try it. Maybe it'll work, right?
So
But your broader point, like why still do it? And is it employee focused? Yeah, I would say it is because I think it's really interesting. I was doing this. I was on this panel earlier today, and there was a historian on there who was taught. This was like for the 4-day work week and AI. And there was a historian on there who was talking about number of hours worked per day over the last century plus. And he had a really interesting graph. And it was showing that the number of hours worked decreased. It was a steady slope downward from the late 19th century, so late 1800s, all the way into the early 20th century. Around the 30s and 40s, it kind of moved up and down. But the point is that that downward curve stopped and then went flat at 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. I think it was measured days per week to work. So yeah, it stopped on 5 days and then it was flat. And I was fascinated by that. I was like, why? If you look at the first part of the chart where it's moving downwards kind of steadily, you look at that and conclude that's the result of several variables, market forces, innovation, technology, um, laws and regulations, all these things working together that is showing gradual improvement in the worker experience over time. Things are gradually getting better, and the employee gets rewarded for that because they don't have to work as much every day, right? But then around the 40s and the 50s, it stops and it goes flat. And I think, well, that looks like it's a result of something maybe more singular that's controlling the situation.
yeah.
Because it doesn't look like it doesn't ebb and flow at all. It's just flat, 5 days. And so, I mean, if you look back in history, you think, okay, what's going on here? I mean, there's a lot of cultural things that could explain it. This person suggested it was a switch from prioritizing leisure to prioritizing luxury. Consumerism started to take off. Madison Avenue took off,
Yeah.
and now people wanted more and they wanted to work. All these things, really interesting. Also, is it more of like corporate culture or this like certain work ethic that was kind of drilled down? But point is, it seemed artificial that all of a sudden this chart stopped going down and flattened at 5 days. So it's really challenged me and my employees to think, well, why? Like, what are we ultimately trying to do? Get back to first principles here. There's nothing that says thou must work 5 days a week in order to provide for your family. Like, this is not a law that came about when Earth was created, right? This is all made up. But it doesn't seem like for the last 80 years, it's that we are working based off of what is actually required, based on what we're trying to do. It seems like there's something else at play that's kind of an invisible hand on it. Whereas prior to the 40s, technology was getting better, regulations were getting better, everything was getting better, and as a result, we didn't have to work 7 days, then we didn't have to work 6 days because we were benefiting from that. So yeah, I think there's something philosophical about this, which is like, let's just throw out this notion that you have to work 5 days in order to do really good, interesting things and build really good, successful businesses.
Right. Well, what's interesting when you talk about that point in history, that's industrial revolution right there, right? Huge upheaval, huge disruption. And it seems to me like what was happening is there are increases in efficiency, and you get to pick which of these variables are going to be constant and which are going to be variable. So in this case, you had an unsustainable, 80, 90, 100, 120, 130 hour work week for the average person. And industrialization allowed that to decrease steadily till you got to 40. And at that point, I don't have a chart in front of me, but my knowledge of history tells me wages and average wealth of the middle class greatly increased
Yeah.
when number of hours worked flatlined. So it seems to me like you have business owners, and just generally, we get to pick which rates are going to be constant so that other rates can be variable. And in this case, what you have is let's make the amount of time that we work constant and increase the value that we generate and the wages that we earn in that amount of time. And this is interesting to me because now we have AI tools coming on, and they're starting this new discussion, similar to probably the discussions that people were having during the Industrial Revolution. And you get to almost take a step back, and you get to say, okay, well, let's say that the average worker's output increases dramatically as a result of artificial intelligence. That's going to generate more revenue, more wealth. That's going to increase efficiencies. It's going to decrease the amount of time it takes to complete tasks. So in that case, what do we want to do? I almost feel like there are a lot of business owners out there who are recognizing this and saying, what do we want to keep constant and what do we want to make variable? And what you've done, it seems, is you've said, I want to make total hours per week worked variable. And what a lot of other people are saying is, let's make revenue variable. Let's make more money. Or let's make overhead variable. Let's reduce our costs. And there's all these people kind of playing tug of war with these ideas. So I guess what leads you to want to emphasize and prioritize amount of time worked per week when you could have feasibly, when you could have even more revenue, or when you could reduce overheads?
Well, it's you can get pretty philosophical on this too, which is like, what is this all for? What are you trying to do? What's your goal, right? I know as someone running a business, I have our short and long-term goals. I know how big I want us to be this decade. I know where I want us to be this year, next year. And then I'll set my next 3-year plan. We'll finish our current 3-year plan next year, and then we'll create another one. And I mean, look, it's like, if we can continue to grow the business the way I want to, because I want us to continue to grow. I want us to
Yeah.
be bigger because I have a vision for what I want this company to be able to do, and it requires more folks, more expertise, things like that. But also, if I can hit those revenue goals and I can have happy people and I say this to everybody who comes in when I hire them, because I meet with everybody we hire on the first day. I said, look, I realize you're not going to be here forever. But my goal is that you always look back on your time here as being a force for good in your career and in your life.
Yeah.
Right. So if we can create a great employee experience where they grow, where they're learning, where they look back and say, I enjoyed that time in my life. I'm glad I did that. and I can give them some opportunities that most places don't, which is that extra day in the week to go be with your spouse, go out for like a lunch date because you got little kids, or take care of that. You have the baby that day while your partner goes out, or you're able to pick up that hobby, or you're able to go shopping so you can be more present with your kids on the weekend, or do your hobbies on the weekend. I mean, fast forward to when you're done with all this and you're retiring, or you're on your deathbed and you're like, did I do good things in this world? Did I do good things for people? And I'm like, yeah, that I feel like would be able to say that if this model works, if I can continue to achieve the goals that I have for this company. I just don't think those two outcomes are mutually exclusive, right? We got to get better. We have to challenge ourselves to accomplish both. But I think it can be done, right? And that's
Yeah.
kind of a big motivator for me.
Yeah. What do your clients think of it?
So not many of them know about it. I post quite a bit on LinkedIn, and I have said that we're doing this, and a couple clients have brought it up because they follow me on LinkedIn. But we made the conscious decision not to tell them, and the reason for that is, kind of the knee jerk reaction is, well, it's none of your business. But the real answer is we don't want to bias our clients in one way or another because they know we're doing 4 days instead of 5. Because you're going to have someone out there who's like, this is anti-American to only work 4 days, right? Or something. I don't want a partner who only works 4 days a week. That's lazy. And so then when they start answering our surveys, they're biased against us. So we didn't announce it because I want their feedback to be honest and pure to the work, right? And nothing else. And their account manager and the relationship with the company. And the number of days we work per week should have nothing to do with it, because we don't sell them on that. We don't say we're going to work this many hours for you. We say this is work we're going to do and the results that we want to get for you.
So the clients that you have heard from, they're okay?
Yeah, actually we've heard a couple things. They're like, how's it going? I think it's really cool you're doing it. And then like, can Chris come and talk to our CEO so we can do it too?
Yeah, I bet. So then let's say we do have major efficiencies. AI helps us, whatever helps us. At some point we went from a 6-day work week to a 5-day work week. Do you envision at some point in the future going from a 5-day work week to a 4-day work week, having this be just a normal thing that everybody does?
It's interesting. I heard a lot of people say, even people who are opposed to it, oh, I think we'll get there eventually. I think that's interesting. I don't think everybody wants to work 4 days. Some people like to go to work and get out of the house, and that's where they get their sense of purpose and meaning. And, that's why people still work on weekends or whatever. But overall, I mean, there's been some legislation put together to try and, do this nationally. Doesn't get anywhere. But I don't know. It's hard to say. I think more companies are going to try it. I think what I get concerned about is those who don't take a strategic approach to it and don't really respect that this is about trying to do things better and more efficiently, and instead they just cut time out. I think that can be dangerous to the longevity of any business.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I think the middle of the bell curve on this will be people who simply cut off time, aren't measuring it well. As it becomes more ubiquitous, it's not as much of a selling point. So you can't get better people just because you have that. Like, we used to be able to recruit great people because we were remote. That was a competitive advantage, and everyone's remote, and we don't have that advantage anymore. Right.
Yeah.
So I've thought about it. I just don't know if you apply it to everyone, if it'll necessarily work. I think it'd be great. On one person on my shoulder says this would be great for people. People will be happier. They'll have more leisure time. They'll be able to live more fuller lives, or live fuller lives. I think that's all great. But the other shoulder makes me a little worried that we are indulging too much in luxury and free time, which Ray Dalio wrote a really interesting book about the rise and fall of nations and global superpowers. And he said he studied all these countries that used to be global superpowers who are no longer. And one of the things you see on the back end of that curve of their power is that there's an excess indulgence in these countries,
Yeah.
and a lot of extra leisure time, and that that could lead to them kind of falling back in terms of their status in the world. So those two things kind of battle in my brain sometimes. I do think with AI coming about, I, I don't see any reason why we can't become like hyper efficient in what we do in so many different ways. That I do think a lot about, will there be enough jobs out there for all the people? Or are we going to really consolidate the number of humans needed? And then you have to get into like, UBI and all these other ideas to try and keep people afloat, if things start to become really concentrated. So I don't know. I can
Yeah.
only speculate, but not very well on that.
Well, on the one hand, if Ray Dalio said it, I'm inclined to listen. I find him incredibly wise. Probably one of my favorite business authors. I'm glad that you brought him up. But on the other hand, I do feel like that, if you were to compare it to the Industrial Revolution, there are far more jobs now than there were before the Industrial Revolution. And there are far more jobs now than there were before the internet. So it seems like major innovation doesn't necessarily have a good track record of robbing us of jobs. It just
Yeah.
creates new and different jobs.
Yep.
But it is certainly true that we do have a significant increase in leisure time, and it does ring a little true for me. I think that the idea of a 4-day work week, where now you're all of a sudden almost 50% of your time's working, 50% of your time's leisure. It does seem we're skewing in a direction where it's getting to the point where work almost takes a back seat, in the sense that the urgency to work, to live, to provide doesn't seem quite so urgent. So I'll be curious to see what happens with that.
Well, and I think especially the younger generations, millennials, Generation Z, they're prioritizing experiences and
Absolutely, yeah.
over material goods, and I a lot of, especially when I'm interviewing younger folks, those are the things that they prioritize more. And you think about older generations, and you say, well, who were they raised by? Well, they're raised by people who grew up during the Great Depression,
Yeah.
right? They've got a very different perspective, and they take a lot fewer things for granted.
Yep.
I'm not blaming the younger generation. I never blame the younger generations, because they're just working with what they got. They were working with based on how they were parented in the world that they, grew up in. Right? It's
Yeah,
not anyone's
they're
fault.
different, but they're not. One's not necessarily
Yeah, they're not
to blame.
genetically inferior because they prioritize this over the other thing. It's like, well, yeah, the other generations worked hard so that they could have, live in this really safe, well-off country. All things considered, that's not their fault. But yeah, it's a bit of a paradigm shift, and I think we just have to acknowledge that we're lucky to be able to prioritize those things. It's hard work was valued because hard work is what actually got the hunger out of your belly. Like, it was a real legitimate survival existential thing you were dealing with. So they prioritize that. But now it's like, well, we don't have to work. Like, we have means.
Yeah.
We know where we're much more likely. I don't want to speak for everybody. There's a lot of people who are going through really tough times in this country. But on average, the accessibility of calories today is much different than it was, 100 years ago. And as a result, the kids who are raised by those generations have different perspective on life.
Yeah. And that's where the technology discussion really shifts when we look forward to the future. And all of these conversations that I'm having are really focused on this. Is we're looking ahead to a significant leap. And you've admitted, I think, in some of your posts too, that you probably wouldn't be doing a pilot of a 4-day work week if it weren't for tools like Chat GPT. So how are what is it about those tools that you see that has you excited to try something like this?
Yeah, I mean, I just to correct, I wouldn't say that we wouldn't be considering it, but it's a real help. It's a real
Yeah.
important asset while we do it. Um, but going back to your question, though, you were asking.
Well, what is it about these AI tools that you're seeing that is most motivating for
Yeah,
you to try to do this to reduce efficiency so dramatically?
it will improve efficient, reduce time, increase
Improve efficiency.
efficiency.
Yeah,
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 it's I continue. I started using ChatGPT I think the week it came out, late November of 22, and I was immediately wowed by it, and I was wowed by it yesterday, trying to do something else. And what I'm finding is that there are so many like different layers to how it can help you, and it's pretty multidimensional in how it can help you. And a lot of people, most people have at least tried it and like, oh, it's great. It can write a paragraph explaining the
yeah.
movie Dumb and Dumber in the tone of Shakespeare. That's funny. That's cool. And then they kind of move on, or at least that's their idea of what it can do. And yes, it can create content, but it can do so much more than that. And the things that I'm fascinated with right now are, like, for example, I can have it write more complex um, Excel formulas and Google scripts than I could ever write. I was pretty good at Excel formulas, but I had it write something for me yesterday that was like several different lines, and that's when I discovered you can actually widen or like deepen the formula bar if you've got a really big formula. I'm like, oh man, this looks like a legitimate formula now. And I don't write script. I'm not a developer yet. It created this whole script for me. So earlier in the podcast, we were talking about these metrics that I have around turnaround times and number of tasks and like
Yeah.
and urgency and everything like that. I was working within it and I was basically dictating to ChatGPT, here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to take data from this spreadsheet in these cells, put it here so I can run it into a report. How do I do that? Because I'm having trouble with the formula. And it's like, well, instead of a formula, you actually need a script. And here's what that script will look like. Oh, how do I install the script? Oh, click here, go here and install it, and then run it, and it should do this. And so it wasn't just saving me time in writing that script or in writing that formula, it was doing that. But now what I'm able to do is look at a report that shows in real time these KPIs, right? So I can then identify if something's going on. So what does that do? It allows me to focus on the thing that matters and not go down a 2 or 3 month rabbit hole chasing some idea of what needs to get better, only to find out that it wasn't broken in the first place. Because that's, we have to guess a lot based off of the information that we have of what needs to be worked on or improved or whatever. So that's something I'm going to benefit from every day. And
Yeah.
and that was from something I did yesterday. So now my organization is smarter, it's faster, it's more focused than it was 24 hours ago, right? And that's just one thing, right? So I think it's another great analogy I heard is, people say this is like an iPhone moment. So if you look at what happened with the iPhone when it came out in, 2009, I think. Um, yeah, it changed how we communicate, right? It changed how we access media, how we can communicate with each other. So it was revolutionary in and of itself, just for those reasons. But then take an app like Uber. Well, what did Uber do? It totally disrupted an entire industry, the taxi cab industry. When they invented the iPhone, they didn't say look at this cool phone and wait until you see what it does for the taxi industry. No
Yeah.
one was thinking about that. But it was that secondary or tertiary effect of that type of technology being available to people, right? And it just wiped out a whole industry and created a new one, right?
Yeah.
So I think this technology is going to do things like that. The other thing that I'm so interested in and excited about, it's not here yet, but I think all the technology is there. It just has to kind of be packaged this way, is when we can have these like company oracles and company co-pilots, where we can take these models, these large language models, license them, and run them in an enclosed environment on our own company data, and it will know everything that we're willing to give it. It will train on all of our company data. So it will know
Yeah.
all the history of our customers. It'll read through all of our Slack messages over time that we want to give it access to, all of our project management stuff, all of our, our employee handbook and process documents and all these things. And so you just could go up to it and say, who was our point of contact at this client 3 years ago? And it spits
Yeah.
out the history on it. Oh, what were the campaigns doing then? Right. Or like, how do I sign up for my 401k, whatever. And it would have all that information for you. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like that. Okay. But then to take to the next step, the Copilot one, that's where if these apps can be manipulated or managed by ChatGPT on your behalf. So you say, oh, I wanted to get back with Sam and we haven't connected in 6 months. Can you look on our calendars for 2 weeks from now and send an email and book a meeting with
Yeah.
Sam and create the Zoom link? And it's one simple command and it's done. All right. That would normally be, I have to send you an email, get a response. I have to set up the calendar invite. This is minutes and maybe even an hour spread out over days to kind of like dial this in. And not an hour, but several minutes. And it's one command and it's all done. Right. So I think companies that have their tech stack in line, meaning that they're using good tools or using good technology that have APIs and are
Yep.
probably developing this for themselves, will be able to integrate this stuff as soon as it's available at like the individual license level, and then just be off to the races. And I'm really, really, really excited about that. And I think the technology's there. It's just not packaged this way yet. So it's kind of like that
Yep.
last mile problem of getting it. But I think it'll happen, in a matter of, the next year or two.
It's really good to hear you say that. There's two pieces of advice that I give out in my capacity as an advisor to, businesses who are using technology. And number one is make sure that you're collecting data, good data, clean data, organized data. And number two is make sure that your tech stack has active development and good APIs.
Yep.
Because you're right, it is coming, it is getting to that point. And it's not going to be a perfectly packaged product that fits your business. There's going to be the need to plug in to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're using spreadsheets instead of a CRM like HubSpot or one of these other ones, you're going to find it harder to plug in.
Yep.
Whereas if you've got, you have good dev support, you have good API support, you're going to find it much easier to get that Oracle, and you're
Yep.
going to find it much easier to put all of this together.
Mm-hmm.
How are you encouraging then your other employees to use tools like ChatGPT?
Yeah, so this is one of the lessons I've had, because I was singing the praises of this tool like in December and trying to get people to start incorporating it. Like everyone was wowed by it at first, but the adoption of it was not automatic. So what we've had to do over several months is continue to promote it, to create learning environments and events for people, because some people are kind of off to the races with it. There's a couple other people in the company where we really nerd out on it. We're sharing the latest and thing
Yeah.
that we're doing. And then others are just more set in their ways, or just not intuitively thinking, oh, maybe ChatGPT can do this for me, right? So one of the things, we've done several things. One, especially in the early days, we were having these regular like lunch and learns. So it's a voluntary thing, but just come in with your lunch on Zoom. And if you have a cool ChatGPT example, put up your hand and you'll get 5 minutes to share it.
Yeah.
And so people were starting to spread ideas around that way. So that was pretty cool. We have a dedicated Slack channel where people post news, links, ideas, lessons, things like that. What I found as a leader is that like I need to, in the beginning I had to force myself to use it. As interesting as it was to me, some days you move on to the next thing, right? But I knew quickly that this thing had so much potential for us that I just forced myself to turn to it first for things.
Yep.
And I've gone to Google search so much less since then.
Yep.
But what I found is that when a forced habit becomes just a real habit, then you start to use it in ways that you couldn't have envisioned originally. And you have it start to do some really interesting, innovative things for you. And then you
Hmm.
can, of course, pick up those lessons and show others. So we get out of this mindset of it can write the next subject line for my email. Yes, it can, but it can do. It's like
Yeah.
it can do so much more than that, right?
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that we've tried. We follow traction, the traction model. So we have quarterly rocks,
Hmm.
and we had this like 4-day work week rock thing where it was like you have to find ways to cut back time in your week and like use AI, and incorporate AI into what you're doing. So there's like this universal company sprint we had where people had to find ways to incorporate it, you know? So
Hmm.
we're big evangelists for it. We talk about it so much. We share examples. We have other things that are a bit more structured where people are a bit more forced to do it. And then by going to the 4-day work week, they're kind of forced to think about things differently and try things differently. And then of
Right.
course they have all these resources at their disposal because we talk so much about it.
Are you encouraging the use of any other tools?
Yeah, like other AI tools.
Yeah, other AI tools.
Yeah. So what I found is so there's some pretty cool ones out there. ChatGPT to me is still the gold standard for the most part. Bard has updated information, although I find Bard can hallucinate more. Claude is good at content and sometimes can outdo ChatGPT on content. Um, there's a tool pi.ai, and that tool I think it's running through the GPT-4 API, but it's more conversational in nature. So it will ask you open-ended questions and then cause you to just think more about something. So if you're like
Hmm.
trying to, um, open up the creative juices a little bit and you're stuck, uh, it's a great tool to kind of get going there. What someone described it as like a chat GPT therapist, because it just whatever you throw at it, it just comes back and it says, oh, so it sounds like you're saying this, that must be hard. Well, what about, have you thought about this? Or what do you do about that? And it just gets the brain going. So yeah, there are other tools out there. I've personally played with like Mid Journey for image creation, Dolly,
Yep.
and those are
Yep.
certainly fun. But since we're not a creative shop, and since you are in some ways a bit limited there, like you can't upload company logo at this point. You can't upload company logos and then like create banner ads or whatever using it.
Right.
All that stuff's coming. Photoshop is showing some really impressive things that it's coming out with. So I think those will get baked in at a very vertical level, and our individual specialists will find ways to use them. But those are some of the 3 or 4 that we use. But ChatGPT is certainly the lion's share of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that you say that about being a therapist, pi.ai. That's actually how I really started to learn the most, I think, about ChatGPT is I knew I needed to force myself to use it to learn how it worked, to learn what it was and wasn't capable of. Because a lot of people don't take the time to understand that it's not going to be very good at certain things, and then they write it off.
Mm-hmm.
But what I started doing is anytime I had a task and wasn't motivated to do that task, I would just plug it into GPT and say, hey,
Yep.
I have this task. I don't know where to start. I'm not motivated. I don't have clarity on it, whatever.
Yeah.
And just see what it came back with.
Yep.
And usually it would come back with action steps. And then you take it and you give it a prompt that is an action step. You say, well, okay, what's it going to do with this? And I learned how to craft prompts to get good outputs, but also I learned how to think about the LLM generally in terms of what it is and what it isn't, because we tend to humanize and anthropomorphize, and we also tend to assume, oh, it's AI, so it's good at math,
Mm-hmm.
uh, certain things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's actually how I learned a lot about these LLMs is just by talking to them as if they were someone who could help, and then I
Oh,
learned how they could actually be helpful.
and
And then
yeah, just you real quick on that point. For education is huge, right? I think first of all,
yeah.
just even kids, every kid could have a private tutor that walks them through these
Hmm.
things and gives them feedback. For us training people in a company, if it had all that information, it could help train people. But it also makes me think of this creativity comment that a lot of people have, which like, oh, this is going to kill creativity. But like, I push back hard on that. I have never felt my creativity more challenged than
Yep.
I do now because I'm no longer like if you go to a Mid Journey, and that thing's just blinking at you, and it's like, I will
Yeah.
create whatever you can imagine.
Yeah.
And you're like, I
And
can't think of anything. I don't know.
meanwhile, you have that constant feed. If you're in Discord playing
Yeah.
with Midjourney, you have that constant feed of other people's prompts, other people's stuff, and you're seeing this massive machine essentially just churn
Right.
out. And
Yeah. And
it,
it's like, if the creative process require to actually get to a finished outcome requires several things, right? The initial idea and then the execution of that idea are kind of the two macro ones, right? That when you're not limited by your physical ability to
yeah,
create, like, it's like, I have this idea for this beautiful scene, but I'm not good at oil painting, so like it's going to
yeah,
look like crap. We don't have to worry about that. It's just, tell me what you're envisioning, and you're like,
yeah,
oh, I'm envisioning this very specific scene that has this because I saw it in a dream, and it's like I can't get it out of my head and I want to materialize it. So it's really, for me, it's stretched my creativity in a really positive way. And I used to do a lot more creative things, like, art and music, before I was doing this job. And I feel like that again, because
yeah.
I'm not limited by the kind of the technical limitations that I have on it. Those are certainly very important, and we don't want to lose those as these tools come about. Those are still, I think, pretty important to the human experience. But this allows people to create anything that they want, and we'll be able to do it with movies and music, and
hmm
everybody will have the tools. I think that's a
Well,
wonderful.
and so those who say AI makes us better, richer, happier as a civilization, I think this is what they have in their minds. You have a tool, AI broadly, um, that is capable of removing the friction between having a good idea, having an imagination, and executing on that idea.
Hmm.
And what people are focusing on is, oh, but it used to be that there were, specific people, specific skills, specific talents necessary to accomplish these things, and those all represent jobs, and you're going to take all that away. But what they're not seeing is everyone can go from thinking something to executing on it much easier.
Hmm.
So the potential to generate value in the world just went to the moon. It went
Yeah.
through the roof.
Yeah.
And you start giving this to imaginative, creative people who lack certain skills, and they're going to do really incredible, amazing things with it. And I think it's very short-sighted to want to take that away, because someone who has a very specific skill might have to adapt.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, how many Taylor Swifts are there out there that we don't know about because they would never ever sing? They never let someone hear their voice, or they've got some physical disability, or they
Yeah.
don't have the ability to play it yet, but they've got the idea.
Or they
Stevie,
lack self-confidence.
yeah,
It
all
could be
these
as easy
things.
as
Yeah,
that.
yeah. It's like, we want to know. What do you have in your head? Like,
Yeah.
let's empower you to show that to us, and put it out there. So yeah, I think there's so much good that's going to come out of it, and yeah, it makes me excited for it.
It seems to be driving us towards a more level playing field in terms of intelligence and ability, and the people who will most thrive with it are the ones who can kind of unlock that creativity. I forget where it was, but I heard somebody recently, I think it was on a podcast, talking about how we're getting to this point to where someone with a low IQ will have access to an AI assistant that essentially raises their IQ, raises their ability to a more average level. And someone with an average IQ has that same assistant and feels like they have something of a peer intelligence-wise that they can throw work to, and find assistance in accomplishing things. And then someone who is of higher intelligence then has an assistant who is more of a personal assistant, less of a peer, more of a subordinate. But in all of that, the greatest benefit is to the one the one with the low IQ who's being brought up a level,
Mhm.
and to a lesser degree the one who's more average, who's just finding that there's another one of me who can take some of my burdens off of me.
Yeah, it's I heard, it reminds me of what I heard with, as it relates to tutoring. And this was a TED talk by the person who runs Khan Academy. It's a great watch where they're talking about how they're incorporating these tools into their online tutoring program. And one of the
Hmm.
charts that they set the whole discussion up with was that, if you look at all the data we have on the impact of tutoring with students, you find that with a tutor, a below average student becomes an average, I think like an average student or even slightly above average, and then an
Yeah.
average becomes an exceptional one. And you'll be able to create have every kid will be able to have a tutor that can work with them,
Yeah.
who can coach them, who understands where that child's challenges are and where their strengths are, and will be able to put the material in a form that the child can connect with. So that's where, what you described is kind of working with the educated population of adults we have today.
Yeah.
Once every child has this at their disposal, I think we'll be a much more educated society and a better performing one overall.
Yeah. I think what I like tying it back to, though, especially as it relates to you with the effort that you make in your own company culture, um, who the kind of business that you've built is you have employees, I'm sure, who have individual challenges that they probably don't talk about. They have roadblocks to unlocking efficiency, roadblocks to unlocking better quality work, etc. And you give them an LLM or a tool set, an AI tool set that kind of solves for some of those challenges, maybe even diagnoses them to a certain degree, but
Mhm.
solves for some of those challenges. I think there's incentive here right now for bosses, for employers to say, okay, let's get our people recognizing that this is a reality and thinking in these terms. How can these tools augment my workflows, augment my my own habits in order to make me a more efficient and higher quality worker? And this is where I think, in terms of like, project management on an individual level, time management on an individual level, I was wondering if it was anything that you had given thought to, um, because I know for my own part, I've leveled up as a result of tools in the last 6 months.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that this isn't some silver bullet panacea. There's still going to be variability in performance.
Yeah,
I just think overall performance is going to go up. There's still going to be a bell curve. The bell curve may be a little tighter, because you could take somebody on that like far left of the bell curve in terms of performance and make them adequate, right? But to those who are already exceptional, I mean, just imagine what's going to do for them, right? So
yeah,
I think it's kind of a rising tide thing, but there's still going to be variability to it. I think it comes down to, um, is the individual, first of all, is the company culture really, um, built to support these tools and encouraging these tools and investing in these tools, right? If they're not, there's not going to be a benefit to get from it. And I still think it's going to come down to the individual. Like there's still choices that are going to have to be made, because generally those who want it, no matter how good they are, even if they're not that good, those who want it tend to outperform those who don't want it, right?
yeah,
So there's still going to be a level. It's not going to solve everything, um, but I think on average it will make people better, especially those who really lean into, especially those who have a growth mindset. They're going to continue to find and explore ways to use this to their benefit, and I think they're going to take off. And I get excited for those people who, are kind of, average, above average, who now become exceptional, and they're playing in this window now where they're exceeding those who maybe naturally are stronger performance than they are, but are not using these tools yet.
yeah,
So they'll kind of put themselves at a status that they didn't know that they'd be able to get to. I'm excited for them there. I think if you apply to everybody, you're going to start to see the variability that we know today.
Yeah. Well, it does seem like what you're saying, though, is the way for an organization to improve is to have its employees, its people, and make the conscious choice to improve.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a tool. Again, at the end of the day, it's a tool,
Yeah.
you know? So we got to
Yeah.
choose to use it. We got to get good at using it. It's got to be kind of a cultural and operational thing available to us. But yeah, it's not like I said, it's not the silver bullet, but
Yeah.
it's really powerful if we choose to embrace it.
Yeah. Choose to embrace it and choose to do good with those increases.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. That we're not just pocketing all the benefit, but we're saying, well, what kind of companies can we create now that we have
Yeah.
this? Not every company needs to IPO. Not every company, should be taking on venture or private equity. It's okay to grow 10, 15% a year. And that's
Yeah.
it. That's okay. You can
Yeah.
still make a lot of money and do really well.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, let's not over glorify these giant organizations who are taking on all this debt in the name of growth, because they're walking a very tight line. It's just, and I'm not saying that every business needs to be this kind of like leisure business where you don't care what happens to it. I'm just saying that you can have a more manageable growth rate. You're focused. You do good work. You're intentional about what you do. You take care of your people, and like it all works out. It's like at some point, more is not better. You know, more is
Yeah.
not always better. And I think we're waking up to that.
Yeah. Well, you're not the first person I've talked to who has said that it's going to be all about the human connection. It's not going to be all about AI and compute. It's going to be about the human connection. Those are the people who are going to succeed.
Well, I've heard some one of the people I was talking to earlier about this was saying it's going to really emphasize the human connection because that'll be the only thing left to do.
Yeah.
You know, all these tools will analyze the data. They'll be able to do the tasks. We're going to spend more time being humans to each other or humans to the people in our circle or whatever, which is
Yeah.
good. I think we could use a dose of that.
I think so. I think so. Chris, I really appreciate you talking to me. I'm going to let you go. It's been an amazing conversation. You said you're 7 weeks in now, and you're gonna evaluate 3 months.
Yeah, we're evaluating as we go, but I think we'll have a better data set after 3 months to decide where we're
Yeah.
going to go from here.
Well, I will. I'll keep track of it. I will connect with you then and just see how it's going.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, I appreciate you talking to me. I think that what you're doing is really good for your company and for your people. And I really respect your willingness to kind of disclose some of those behind the scenes things that you're doing in order to improve that culture. Talk about motives. Talk about mindset.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate you having me on. I love talking about this stuff, and I'll continue to post it and kind of tell the story as it's coming together because I know
Excellent.
people are really interested in that, and hopefully we can connect sometime down the road.
Yeah. So if anybody out there is interested, just connect with Chris on LinkedIn. He seems pretty responsive. Happy to talk about it,
Yeah.
and we'll see how it goes. We look forward to seeing it.